Captain Don Hunter. I have a Coast Guard captain's license. I operate a tow service here on Lake Cumberland. We tow in stranded boaters, so I've got a little bit of background there. Been a licensed captain for 20 years now. Originally born and raised in upstate New York. Lived in Florida 16 years where I started this business, and we relocated here in 2006, brought the business with me. Over the time in Florida and over my background, I've done all kinds of things. I am previously a licensed marine surveyor, the guy that does home inspections on boats for insurance companies and such. And along with that title being a captain, I ended up helping to train some of the progressive insurance companies and nationwide insurance companies' original claims reps that did boat claims. I was their certified opinion when it came to settling claims on certain losses in Florida, and so we did a bunch of training classes for things like that. And like I say, we ended up in the tow service, business I liked, and we moved here because there was nobody here doing it. So I've seen a lot over the years. We respond to the accident calls on the lake, and we tow in vessels that are broken down. We raise boats that are sunk. I employ 2 or 3 divers, and we do a lot of dock work on the lake and things like that. As far as Kentucky specific stuff, the lakes here are very rural, at least from what I've seen of it. When you are out on the water, I mean, first of all, it's a good idea if you're going to be out, especially the fishermen, if you're going to be out by yourselves, people should probably know where you're at, where you're going to be, when you expect to return. They call that a float plan. Somebody responsible should know where you're at and how, when to expect you back and who to call should you not come back. The other thing is know who the specific entity is that's responsible for safety on the lake or law enforcement. You would want to know, is your lake predominantly handled by Fish and Wildlife? Is it a sheriff's department that may handle it? Who to call, basically. A lot of places you just call 911, but that's not necessarily always your best avenue. For instance, on Lake Cumberland, your best avenue is to call the Fish and Wildlife Department directly at 1-800-ALERT. 1-800-25-ALERT, sorry. Because they're your quickest response here. Now that's not true everywhere. If you're up on the river, the Coast Guard might be so you know who to call when there is an emergency, first of all, on the Kentucky stuff. Especially as it gets into the off season, fewer boaters around, you really want to make sure that you've got a backup plan. If you want excitement, come sit at a boat ramp on a Sunday afternoon when people are pulling out. You see more divorces begin to happen right there. So boat ramp etiquette. I mean, when you are getting your boat ready to launch for the first time of the year, first of all, what I always did, I would start it in the driveway on a hose first. Make sure the battery's up. Make sure I've got all my gear. Make sure things are ready to rock and roll. When you get to the ramp, you pull up in the upper parking lot and get your boat prepped. Put whatever gear from your pickup into it. Get your straps undone, get your covers off and stowed, then get in line for the ramp so that you're not taking up a lot of people's time. Load your boat. Try not to put people in it till it's close to the water. I realize that's not always feasible depending on people's physical condition, but there have been times where boats come uncoupled from the tow vehicle and go down the ramp by themselves. You don't necessarily want your family in there when that's happening. So I usually tell people to try to get it as close to the water as possible before they start loading actual human beings in. And then, just try to be patient. I mean, we're at the lake, we're supposed to be relaxing. We're not supposed to be Death Race 2000 here. It's supposed to be, we're supposed to be having fun. Alcohol and boating. No matter what the music videos tell you and show you, you need at least one person on that boat to be sober. I mean, the acts of hot sun, the waves, and the motion of the water, and just the fact that there's no traffic schemes. I mean, boats can come from anywhere. You don't have brakes. You just really need somebody that's got all their faculties because the guy in charge of driving the boat is in charge of everybody in there. If you look back and make sure everybody's smiling all the time, I mean, that's you. You have to be responsible for them. So a sober driver is not only, the law, but it's really good common sense. Navigation is a whole topic all of its own. I know that you know, people call it a lake and they want to be able to go wherever they want to go. But in certain scenarios, it would pay if people would keep to the right as much as possible. And I know there's no stripe down the middle of the lake. I've heard people tell me that all the time. But if everybody could just keep to the right, number one, that gives you some separation in the middle so your wake from your boat dissipates. That means the oncoming guy has less of a huge wave to try to navigate over. That's the first thing. The other thing is it tends to follow the navigation rules to where boats pass just like they do in a car. The lighting on the boats is set up so that you're supposed to yield to the green, to a red light on the left side of a boat. Well, if you're passing on the wrong side, you're seeing the wrong thing at night. So that's the first thing. I hear all the time people saying, this guy came way too close to me and cut in front of me. And that, when you're crossing someone, you normally, if there's even the hint that you need to worry about whether somebody's hitting you, you need to cross behind the oncoming boat. You know, you don't need to cross in front of somebody. Like I said, there's no big rush to be anywhere on the lake. So always cross behind when you can. No wake zones. Obviously, there's no wake zones. There's a law in Kentucky that 200 feet around any commercial marina is no wake, whether it's marked or not. There's a lot of things like that you just need to slow down. And no wake means idle speed, where you can best control your boat. It doesn't mean idle. It means you need to be able to navigate, and leave as minimum a wake as possible. As far as navigating at nighttime, there's a lot of things to discuss about that. A lot of people aren't comfortable at night, and that's fine, but the ones that are and go out, there's a lot of things to consider. I know personally, when I get out at night running the towboat, when we come back into the harbor, and the Jamestown Marina is a big lit structure, what happens is you have backlighting, okay? You may not necessarily see a boat crossing in front of it. And at night, you don't have any depth perception. So sometimes it can be really difficult to tell where this boat is that you may see moving when you have backlit behind you. And that's where improper lighting really plays a big deal. And of course, we're talking about in a busy harbor or a busy area around a marina. The last thing you want is somebody blinding you with docking lights. All these pontoons anymore come with what's called docking lights. And people treat them as if they're headlights. Well, the reality is they're not headlights. A headlight or a spotlight on the water really does not do any good, because water is such a reflective surface that when you shine a light on it, it reflects off in who knows what direction. It doesn't reflect light back to you where you can see it. So docking lights, headlights on the water really do not help a whole lot. What it does do is it puts light where it's unintended. So you end up with light in someone else's face coming at you where that person can't maybe navigate well in an area that's busy. So docking lights around the marina and LED lights that obscure the regular navigation lights that make it impossible for me to tell which way that guy is moving really become an issue you should have nothing on but the navigation lights. And as far as for your own safety, when you're out in your own boat, you really don't want a whole bunch of lights on inside your boat. Matter of fact, on the towboat, when we're out, I throw a towel over my gauges so that I black out the gauges at night. This way we can keep our adjusted night vision and be able to see much further in the dark than without it. If you have lights on inside, it washes the boat with light, and it kills you. You really end up not being able to see very far at all. There's a complete list of required items. Obviously, you have to have a personal flotation device that's properly sized for every occupant of the boat when you're out. These need to be easily accessible. Obviously, you need them in an emergency. You don't want to be digging through a Walmart bag and trying to unwrap them if your boat's sinking. You want to have them where you can get to them. Children obviously take a smaller one than a guy my size, so you have to have whatever fits your crew that day. Obviously, a fire extinguisher is required. Even on the outboard boats, you need to have a fire extinguisher. Because I mean, there's still electrical items in the boat and a fuel tank, so you need to have a fire extinguisher ready and be of correct size for the size boat. And you can find a list on the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources website of all that stuff if you Google it, and it'll tell you sizes and actual requirements. You have to have a signal producing device, a horn basically, or a distress flag. You know, there's a distress flag. It looks like a upside down exclamation mark in orange that you fly. When you fly that flag, you're basically calling Mayday. So that normally means a life-threatening situation. Now, people misuse it and use it if they're broken down, or you know, and that's probably fine on this lake. But you also if you have a boat with an inboard engine, it's required to have a bilge blower. Basically, it takes any fumes or air out of the lowest part of the boat and expels it outside before you hit the key to crank the engine. Gas fumes are heavier than air, so when they're in an enclosed boat, they sink to the lowest part. This blower actually is a mechanical means of clearing any fumes out before you start to keep from having an explosion. So any boat with an inboard apparatus is required to have a blower. Of course, proper lighting. Every boat has to have a red and green light on the bow and an overall 360-degree viewable white light, either one by itself if the boat's small enough, or in conjunction with one on a mast and one behind. Those are used to be able to show other boaters which direction you're heading at night. The red and green lights show ahead. Red is on your left side, green is on your right. White overhead, like if you're coming up behind a boat at night, all you see is the white light until you get alongside. Then you start seeing the colored lights. Then you know which side you're on. So that's an important thing to have correct. Other required items, the boat should have an operable bilge pump. God knows every now and then you develop a leak. If you're out on the lake, you'd want to be able to clear the bilge of that. So obviously you'd also want to have a well-stocked first aid kit, something related to boating, because when you go to Walmart and get like a boating first aid kit or wherever you buy your supplies at, most of that stuff also comes with sunburn cream and Dramamine pills and things like that aren't in a normal first aid kit. So that's kind of nice to have. If you have a boat with an inboard engine, in other words, the engine built inside the boat, they're required to have a backfire flame arrestor on top of the carburetor, so that if the engine backfires, the flame that comes up through the carburetor is not a threat to any fumes that might be in the bilge of the boat and set it on fire. If your boat's equipped with a toilet, there's a couple different types. The smaller boats are typically going to be a self-contained unit and has a holding tank. It has to be an approved type. That particular type, that holding tank type, is the type you take and empty it on shore when you get back at a specific facility or in your toilet, however that's disposed of. The bigger boats have a sanitation device that actually they run a type 1 or type 2 marine sanitation device, where the waste can be treated and either pumped at a marina facility or pumped overboard once treated. So that's pretty much the marine sanitation device part of things. As far as suggested items, if the boat's small enough, having a paddle, a way to be able to make your way a short distance, a marine radio, either handheld or fixed mount, is a nice thing to have. A lot of places don't use the radio as much as they used to. They depend on cell phones. But the marine radio is one of those things where it counts on the community to help. So emergency channel 16, if you were to get on there and hail Mayday, or I need a tow or something like that, anybody else that has a marine radio on that's monitoring channel 16 could either relay your call for help to an authority or come assist as best they could on their own. Whereas, if your cell phone doesn't have any signal, you're kind of just stuck waiting, flagging the next Joe down, to see what happens. Most lakes don't have a speed limit. Most bodies of water in Kentucky don't have a speed limit. Some of them have nighttime restrictions to where it's idle speed only at night. Lake Cumberland, where we are today, is not one of those lakes. Most low speed areas are marked by either no ski buoys or no wake buoys. No ski means it's a narrow area and you shouldn't be towing a skier in that area. It doesn't mean no wake. No wake buoy or an idle speed buoy means that you're supposed to use minimal wake, put out minimal wake. So your boat has to be at the slowest speed possible to maintain maneuverability. As far as anything else, it's pretty much left up to the common sense of the operator. The navigation rules say you're not supposed to be operating a boat faster than you can avoid a collision. So it's a pretty open-ended law as far as that goes. Obviously, the faster you go, the more open to issues you're going to be. Most people are going to travel at a speed that they're comfortable with. You know, a regular pontoon anymore travels 20 to 30 miles an hour, but a go fast might do 60 or 70 miles an hour depending on the lake and conditions. You got to be cognizant of your other boaters. You know, you have to be respectful of them and pass with a great distance. You're not supposed to be playing chicken with people on the lake and, you know, causing havoc. I've seen these people that come to the lake, okay? They come down the interstate 80 mile an hour, towing their boat, they load up, they get on the water, next thing you know, they're 80 mile an hour out on the water, running around from place to place. It's supposed to be relaxing, boating in general. I mean, it's where you go to relieve your stress and to have fun. It's not supposed to be, like you said, an episode of Survivor, you know, the last man finished wins, or, you know, the first guy to point A wins. I mean, there's so many people that break down on the lake, okay, and they call me, and I say, where are you? They're like, I don't know. I said, okay, you don't know. You didn't see this or this or this along the, no, I didn't see anything. I just, you know, I went to the party. I didn't see anything in between. They can't express to me where they're at. And I'm thinking, God, how sad is that they're not seeing the relaxing part of being on the water, the family time, any of that, you know? So that just always floors me. But, you know, I think that, you know, just kind of slow down, smell the roses, take a look at the scenery, you know, visit the goat on Lake Cumberland, you know, whatever it is, but just kind of take your time and relax with it and have fun. Obviously, I've seen a lot of the accidents related to speed. I've towed the two big accidents from the poker runs that we've had here in the past. I've raised both of those boats and dealt with that. There's been a lot of issues where people have run over another boat at night or in low visibility times. So speed is definitely a factor, and you need to, you know, operate within your comfort zone. Following a boat towing a tube or a skier or a wakeboarder, you definitely don't want to follow directly behind them. I mean, if the guy falls off, you certainly didn't have room to stop or maneuver around. There's no reason to be directly behind somebody on skis. There really isn't. You need to be off to one side or the other. Give them plenty of room. Just be respectful of their space, you know? I mean, the last thing you need is to run over somebody that's fallen from skiing, you know? That'd be a bad deal. So I guess some of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to boating is if you start at the root of it, it's probably lack of maintenance on things, you know? Being in the tow service, of course, I see lack of maintenance items end up being a tow pretty quickly. And the early season stuff is a little different than the end of season stuff, but in the early season, batteries are a huge thing, and water pumps on boats. Batteries, if your battery is over 2 years old, it's pretty much suspect. You know, it needs to be charged at the beginning of the season, needs to be tested by somebody that has a proper tester for load and all that to make sure that it's going to actually perform as it's supposed to. The newer boats, they are really dependent on electrical because of fuel injection, fuel pumps, things that weren't there before. There's a lot of amperage draw when the boat's running. The average boat, if you try to jump start a boat at the ramp or at the dock and go out, that boat has so much load on the battery that it may not have enough charging system capacity to bring a flat battery totally back to charge while you're out and running for an hour. So we constantly see people that are out that have been jumped at the dock, that they go out, stop, swim, and then the boat won't restart. So batteries are a big deal. Water pumps on boats are another big deal. If your water pump, let's say you have an inboard powered boat, and the water pump impeller that takes seawater or lake water, runs through the engine to cool it, and then expels it out through the exhaust, okay? That's the system. That water pump impeller is good for about 2 seasons or 100 hours of use. If it's older than that, it should be replaced. If it's sat stagnant for more than 2 or 3 seasons stored, it should be replaced before you go out. The water cooling system in that boat is pretty darn important because the water that's used in the engine cools the exhaust and keeps the rubber exhaust parts from burning, catching fire, melting, and starting the boat on fire when you're out. So that's a pretty important thing. Don't ever try to limp a boat back that's overheated. Call a buddy, call the tow service, call somebody to get you back home rather than try to limp it. You'll end up ruining the engine or catching the boat on fire, one or the other. That's a biggie. The other things would be right-of-way, understanding right-of-way as part of the navigation rules. When you have boats on a reciprocal course, meaning coming at each other, those boats should really theoretically pass like they would in a car, as if there was a middle line, imaginary line you want to pass with your left side to their left side, and so on. Boats on a crossing course, the law reads the boat to the right of you always has the right of way. So if you're the boat over here on the left and there's a boat coming this way and there's a danger of a collision, you have to give way and cross behind a boat that's on your right. So if everybody gives way to the boat on their right, that's how the traffic scheme is supposed to work. Boats are designed for a specific number of people. Boats under 24 feet in length come with a capacity plate, first of all. That capacity plate tells you how many persons weighing a certain amount or less are allowed to be on that boat based on how the boat was originally tested by the Coast Guard for capacity limits as far as being safe to operate. You know, the average 20-foot boat is probably rated for 6 passengers at 165 pounds each, and that plate will tell you 6 passengers or 1,480 pounds, whatever that is. You get a bunch of guys like me on there, you're obviously going to get 3 people like me on there, where 6 average-sized people be on there. So there's always a number of persons or a specific weight that you don't want to get above. With that being said, there may be seating for 12, but you don't want to exceed those capacity limits because that's one of the things that get looked at. As far as seating goes, the boats are designed to be having people sit in the proper areas, okay? So let's say you have a closed bow cruiser. You're not supposed to have anybody sitting up on the front of that boat in front of the windshield while underway. It's actually illegal. You can't have people hanging their feet off under the rails while the boat's moving. Pontoons, I see people a lot of times have their kids up front with their feet down in the water. Big mistake. If you have a wave come and grab that kid's legs and pull them under, you cannot get the boat stopped in time to not run them over. The same thing with rental houseboats. You're not supposed to be in front of the rail up above. Bass boats, obviously, you're not going to be in a tall seat while running at speed. You have to be seated down in position. These are all reasons to get pulled over and ticketed in the state of Kentucky. You have to be in the proper placement when at speed or above idle. You don't want to be sitting on the swim platform on the back of a boat while even going through an idle zone. The threat of getting feet entangled in a propeller is real. It's a real thing. When we talk about getting gas into a boat, and I know a lot of you have trailerable boats and you're going to fill up at a gas station. If you're not that customer, when you are filling up at a marina or on the lake and you have a boat with a cabin, the typical procedure would be to make sure all your cabin doors and windows are closed when fueling, okay? So you close up everything, you turn the engine off, you turn off electrical items, you fuel the boat. When you're done fueling the boat, you open the windows and doors, you open the engine hatch, you sniff to make sure that there's no fumes apparent in your engine compartment. You do a visual check to make sure nothing's leaking. You turn your blower on for a minimum of 5 minutes to make sure that you've cleared any fumes out of the bilge. And again, you check for the smell. I mean, the best sensor is your nose for detecting fuel leaks. I mean, you can smell a minute amount of fuel. So you typically would check one more time before starting your boat, turn the key and go at it. And you know, I tell people all the time, please do not get in a rush at the fuel dock. I realize there may be other people in line, But if you rush that and you set fire to your boat at a fuel pier, you've got a real problem on your hands, you know, and it happens. We've put a fire out here at this ramp where we're at here last year. There was a fellow that fueled his boat at a gas station up on land, brought it down here, didn't realize there was a hole in the fuel line, leaked gas in the bilge. He backed the boat into the water, started it up, and immediately ended up with an explosion. Sent him out of the boat, his wife in the boat, floating with it on fire. So, and it escalated from there. So it's nothing to take light, you know. I mean, even when you launch the boat, you should really have the engine hatch up and be looking before you turn the key. And not only for the fuel, but also for incoming water. I've seen things where mice have chewed holes in outboard in the seals for the outdrives on boats. You back it in the water, next thing you got a leak that you didn't have in the fall. So it's always a good idea to be looking for things like that, especially the first time of the season. So navigating around bridges, obviously there's piers, and the piers may or may not represent the center channel of the river. You have to know by where the marker buoys are placed, and at night by how the lights are arranged on the bridge where they expect the traffic to pass under the bridge. Not always is it in the center of the body of water, so that's something to check your charts for your particular area and follow the guidelines there. The bridge abutments, you want to give them a pretty good distance. Depending on water levels, they could be much larger under the water than what you see above the water. So you usually, and of course you would want to pass again, pass other boats under the bridge as if you're in a car on the road. This way everybody knows what to expect of each other. You know, you don't not crisscrossing paths and such. They're not necessarily marked as idle speed, although some on smaller bodies of water could be idle speed when you cross under, so you'd want to watch for markers for that as well. Obviously, dams like Wolf Creek Dam, it's not necessarily a hazard, but they are marked to keep your distance from it. Some of that is for your own safety, obviously, and some of it is due to homeland security issues. When you get up on the river, we start talking about low-head dams. Obviously, the gates that allow you through, the locks that allow you through to pass by a low-head dam on the Ohio River, they're marked, and you would stay in those channels to cross through. You would want to stay clear of the low-head dam itself because you run the risk of, if you're on the downside, getting caught up in a boil of water coming over it, and that can produce unexpected things. This also happens here at Wolf Creek when you're fishing the river. When you get up near the dam while they're doing releases, the boil of water coming out can produce unexpected effects and actually draw you back into the dam. We had an instance last year where I took a call for a broken down boater below the dam, and turned out it was a couple guys on a pontoon boat that had been caught up in such a boil on the downside. I ended up calling the powerhouse and getting them to shut the dam down so that they could do the rescue to get the people off the boat. They were two fishermen, no life jackets, and one of them was off the boat by the time we got the dam shut down to rescue them. So you want to kind of keep your distance. I realize there's good fishing there, but when they're generating, you really need to give your distance on those things. Again, back on navigation rules, I mean, just try to be courteous to your fellow boater. We're all out on sharing the same water. Pass like you would in a car. Give the boat to your right, the right of way, as per the rules. When overtaking, the boat that you're overtaking is what's called the burdened vessel. They are burdened with keeping the same course and speed. They're not supposed to make any turns or adjustments to speed while you're passing them, because as you're passing them, you have to assume that they're going to continue doing what they're doing in order to make your pass. That's if you're overtaking. So if you're the overtaking vessel, you are the vessel that has to maneuver should something happen and you can't complete the pass. When you're out on the lake and you come across another boat's wake, the best way to process that is by taking that wake at about a 45-degree angle. So if you have a wake coming at you, you want to have your boat roughly 45 degrees into that wake. And the reason is because the boat will cross up and over. It'll roll as well as up and down. If you try to go straight into it, your boat is going to go up and over top and dive. On a pontoon boat, you'll dive and take water right over the fence. You have to take it at a 45 so that the boat will actually roll and come up and over That's the smoothest way across a large wake put out by another boat. And obviously adjust your speed. You don't want to do it at full speed. When we're talking about anchoring a boat, probably the most popular anchor is a fluke anchor or a Danforth. It's the one with the two triangle spikes and the rod in the middle that pivots. That's probably the most widely used. On this lake, a lot of people like to use a box anchor. I always tell people use the one that works best for you, experiment a little bit. Certain places you would use a mushroom anchor if you have a mud bottom because they tend to work better. More of a key than the anchor is actually the rod or the line that goes to your anchor, okay? You're not required, but it's best to have a length of chain that connects your anchor to your line, to the boat. The reason for this chain is not only because it adds weight to the underwater ground tackle package, but it also has movement to it. That movement between the lengths of chain and the weight actually keep that anchor dug into the ground instead of being pulled up and dislodged. So the way an anchor works, a fluke anchor, you'll have your triangles will dig down into the ground while the piece that your shackle is attached to stays pretty much level. So it digs like this. By having a chain on here, it keeps that pull horizontal to the bottom, okay? When you go to retrieve an anchor, you would pull the boat up directly over top of it so that your line is directly down to it. And then you would pull that shank up and that releases the flukes from the bottom, and then you can retrieve it from there. You don't ever try to retrieve it from back in the position where you were anchored off of, because you're supposed to leave a 7-to-1 scope. So if you're in 10 feet of water, the best way to anchor is to have 70 feet of line out for the best holding. And that's important if you're stranded near a dam or running water. You'd want to have as much scope as possible for that line to have allow the anchor to do its job by setting into the bottom correctly. A lot of places it's not feasible. On Cumberland, we have 150 feet of water, so getting seven times that depth in line is pretty much impossible. But you have to modify the best you can in those circumstances. Emergencies on the water. First of all, you have to define what an emergency on the water is. A true emergency is something that affects life and death. Property is something kind of different. If you're broken down or out of gas, that is considered not really an emergency. It can eventually become an emergency depending on how long it goes on, but it's not necessarily an emergency up front. So if we're talking about a true emergency, we're talking about life or death. Bodily injury, fire aboard, sinking, taking on water. Those are true emergencies. And depending on the body of the water that you're on will make a difference of how you contact for help. So here on Lake Cumberland, again, the best resource would be the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. You can reach them at 800-25-ALERT, and that goes through State Police Dispatch. They dispatch the closest officer to you on this lake. Now on the lake or river where you boat, that may not be the case. If you're up on the Ohio River, there's a couple tow companies up there. There's rescue services. There's sheriff's departments that have boats. There's the Coast Guard. So you really need to kind of research who your best first call is in those instances. And of course, up on the river, the marine radio is used pretty heavily. So you have that resource available to you. The Coast Guard monitors Channel 16 up there. Most of these other small lakes, nobody actually monitors it, but other boaters may. And other boaters sometimes are your best resource. So if you were to get on Channel 16 and hail Mayday and someone responds, that may be your best source for the quickest help. And then you can work out from there. 911 works in most places. Sometimes it's not always the most efficient on the water. That's why I mentioned these other things first, because they're more marine related. During an emergency, the typical questions that are asked is, first of all, what is the emergency? So you need to be able to tell them what the emergency is. When we train for radio usage, we give our position. We tell them exactly where we're at, what the description of our boat is, so they know what to look for. You tell them what the emergency is. Basically, we've got a 40-year-old man that broke his leg. We are half a mile east of the Cooper power plant on Lake Cumberland, and we need transport and assistance. And you would continue on answering any questions the dispatcher has at that point. You need to give as many callback numbers as possible, and try to stay on the line and let them know how the situation is progressing. We've got him onshore. He's immobile at the moment. Things have not changed. We usually, on the radio, we do 10-minute updates until help arrives. Sometimes you may not have that ability. You may have to call dispatch back a couple times till help arrives, and then of course be ready to make yourself seen when a boat does arrive. If you're in a slew of 4 or 5 boats, you need to be able to point yourself out as the one needing help pretty quickly. We talked about earlier, what helps in that manner is if you had a paddle and an orange life jacket, you can strap the two together and use it as a flag and wave it. It's pretty effective for getting people to notice you. Moving injured persons really probably should not be done unless you're qualified to do so, unless there's extenuating circumstances. We had a fellow that broke his leg in the rocks on Lake Cumberland here last year, and it was a spiral fracture of his upper bone leg. That's a pretty big deal. You really don't want to move that person because you could break an artery and cause an internal bleeding problem and not really help that person at all. I advised that person to stay there until help arrived, and we got Fish and Wildlife over there, and they had EMS on board the boat and were able to transport him once they immobilized the leg. So sometimes it's best to just leave somebody until professional help arrives. Other times you may not have that ability. Sometimes time is not on your side. You have to get that person on your boat and to the nearest pickup facility, whether it be a ramp or a marina where there's help and the EMT can meet you. You got to do your best. Obviously, all you can do is what you can do on that particular time. When it's a non-emergency, if you've run out of gas or broken down, then you have to start thinking about what's my backup plan? Is there a tow service that can come help me? Is there a rescue squad that offers that service? It's basically, because you can't really tie up professional law enforcement towing a boat, because you never know what their next call is going to be. They can't be towing a boat for an hour back to the marina for somebody that's run out of gas. So it just doesn't work out well for the person that really needs the true help at that point. So you need to have other backup plans, whether that be calling a buddy to bring you back, but bogging them down with non-emergency stuff is usually not a good idea for anybody. Jet skis are not babysitters. There's a lot of the accidents that I've responded to on this lake involve jet skis. And it's usually because the operator has not been trained or is not used to it or not been monitored, however you want to call it. They kind of have been put on a ski that can do 70 some mile an hour with no training whatsoever and don't understand the principles of it. Obviously, a jet ski only turns when you have power because it's water jet driven. You let off the throttle, you don't have any water jet, it doesn't steer. So that's the first thing. And they have a couple models now they claim have brakes on them. It's got a plate that comes down and tries to stop you, but for the most part, they don't have any brakes. The last thing that you want to do is the first thing that most people want to do in a jet ski, and that is follow behind a big cruiser and jump over the wave that it puts off behind it, because we're not on the ocean. We're on a flat body of water that's calm, and it's human nature to want to crisscross in and off behind a boat. It's highly illegal, and it'll get you hurt if you're not careful. It just is not a good thing to do at all. I know it's fun, but we've had a couple instances of people being killed where 2 skis come together trying to cross a wake behind a powerboat. Not something you want to do. They're not allowed out after dusk. There's no lighting on them. Another big issue, you just cannot be on a ski after dusk at all, period. They are legal to pull a skier with as long as you have a mirror or a spotter. So you can do that with them. I would certainly suggest really thinking about that one, because your skier can really outweigh the craft pretty easily and affect how it operates. So although it's legal, I don't know that I would suggest it. Most of the accidents we've responded to in jet skis have had to do with their lack of steerage when the throttle is released. We've recovered some out of the rocks. We've recovered some where people have jumped wakes, hit their head on the steering wheel, and they come down and become unconscious and drowned. I've got several examples of that type of behavior. For the most part, most people operate them well. I mean, we've got people that run one end of the lake to the other with them and love them, you know. But there's the other crowd, like when you have people visiting you, you've got a couple young boys, you have a couple skis, they naturally want to be on the skis. The visitor is typically the one that gets hurt because he does not have the background to know how to operate it. You really got to really think 15 times before you let anybody like that out on a ski unmonitored. Out of sight, you know, you never know what they're going to be doing, and they usually go in pairs, and next thing you know, they'll be jumping wakes. Another thing to remember also is that any PWC or jet ski or anything with an engine that operates on the water, they all have to respond to the same navigational rules as a boat or a houseboat or a ship even. They all have to follow the same rules and guidelines. Again, the PWC is not allowed to operate after night, so, you know, after dusk. So the lighting isn't an issue, but everything else applies. Life jackets, fire extinguisher, all the same safety gear. You really have to understand that a boat is not a car. It doesn't operate the same as a car. It doesn't steer the same. It's totally different. You have a totally different perception of movement. You don't have any regulated traffic schemes. Staying focused straight ahead of you doesn't work on a boat because people can come at you at all different angles. You have to check behind you at all times. You need to turn around and make sure the people that are your passengers are still smiling. I mean, there's a whole lot to it. You're the captain of the boat when you own it and you're driving it. Number one, you have to be sober, but you also need to understand that you are in control of their lives for the time you're out. So you're in charge of their well-being. You have to be the one that's the adult in the boat, basically taking care of people, making sure that things don't go wrong. You're the one that needs to be prepared. And I don't want to be a downer here and make it seem like it's not fun, because it is, but there's also responsibility that comes with it, because you just can't get off a boat and walk if you don't like what's going on. I mean, there's nobody that I know that can walk on water. So that's the first thing. And then to go on from there, you need to do smart things. You need to have a little bit of common sense, because the water truly weeds out the ones that don't have any common sense pretty quickly. You don't want to do things like swim in the middle of a lake when you can be off on the side out of people's way. We've had a couple instances where people were swimming behind their boat and been run over by another boat coming by at dusk. The fellow in the running over boat said that he didn't have his lights on. Well, it doesn't matter. You still have to have a lookout and be traveling at a speed safe enough to be able to stop or maneuver away from a collision. I've got photos of this deal where the boat ran over another boat and left prop scars. You know, one of the people in the water was badly injured, almost severed his thumb. So you have to really be aware of your surroundings at all times, keep your head on a swivel kind of, and make sure that you're doing the right thing for the people that you brought with you. There was an instance a few years ago out here on the main lake, right around the corner from where we stand now, where there was a family out on a pontoon boat, and this is after dark. They were idling back to the marina after seeing a band down at Grider Hill, and another fellow had come up with two other boats running up the lake at around 40 miles an hour after dark. And he didn't see this pontoon idling along, drove completely over the boat, set the engine on the pontoon on fire, and threw the main operator off into the lake with two broken legs. The only way that he was able to find the surface was from the light of the fire. He swam towards it with his arms only, and was rescued by his daughter's boyfriend that was on the boat. He pulled him out of the water and then put the fire out, and they called us for assistance. Not a good scene. The driver of the boat that hit him was well intoxicated and in the dark, so failure to keep a lookout, failure to travel at safe speed, BWI, boating while intoxicated, ended up with 7 years, I believe, in jail for wanton endangerment and other infractions. So not something you want to be a part of. The bottom line to all this, as far as boating safety goes, is you can't just drive around blindly. I mean, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to be courteous to others. You have to be aware of your surroundings and try to have a good time doing it. I mean, we all want to be out there having a good time, everybody. You don't want to ruin somebody else's good time, and you certainly, want to provide you and your riders a good time. But there are definite steps that you have to follow to make sure that everything works out well at the end of the day.